So what are APIs basically? Smita has taken a small, like she gave a small intro. So if someone would like to tell what are APIs? Anyone?
Yeah, it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it holds some data. So whenever you hit that route, so it will give you back the data, or it will have some functions that it will perform when you hit that particular route.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we can't just say it just returns our data or it has some routes. Yeah, API is basically stand for Application Programming Interface. As the name says, like it is an interface which can be used by two applications to talk to each other. So suppose you have different applications, right? You want to talk from one of your application to other application, like from your front end to back end. So there needs to be some way to talk within the service. So API defines that interface on how these two should communicate. So it can be via API, it can be via WebSocket, it can be via any method. So that interface defines like how it can be. And REST APIs are the most common we use to talk between the APIs because it's easily understandable by us as well and the system also. So mostly we make use of REST APIs. You might have seen we make GET request, we make POST request to submit some data, to fetch some data. Everything happens via the API only. If you hit google.com also, then also API call goes to server, then it will fetch that web page, then it will show to you. So everything is happening via the API interface. So yeah, we'll be using fetch API to make our first API call. Fetch is something provided by the JavaScript internally. So like you don't need to install it separately. It comes packaged within your browser and you can directly make use of it. Let's create a small application. What we'll be doing is we'll be making a call to an API and we'll be retrieving the data. We'll retrieve a code, basically code of the day from the API. I'll share the API which I'm using. So yeah, you can find several open source APIs. It can be for any use case. So suppose you want to make use of GitHub data within your app, so you can make use of GitHub APIs if they provide. If you want to fetch some random images on your web page, you can make use of APIs provided by several providers to get the images. One can be on Splash as well. Similar to these, like most of the service providers provide APIs which you can use within your product. So today I'm using they said so codes API. It just provides me an endpoint with some specific entries. So if I hit /QOD with this endpoint, it will return me code of the day. I can fetch for a specific category, language, I can fetch random code. So the way to implement APIs is first you should start with the documentation of the API which you want to use. It will have all the instructions like how you can make use of the API. Some APIs like are authorized, protected, so you need to sign up for the account, get your API keys to make use of the API. Today, what we are using is a simple API which don't need which don't need a API key to make use of it. If you want to use these below routes, then you need a API key. It has defined you need an API to access these services. The above one are free. So I'll be making use of /QOD today to fetch code of the day. Yeah. So what I will do is I want to display a code over here. Did I remove something? And yeah, and I
You have
want
shared
a
a list of public APIs. You can check them out like if you want to play and build any APIs application. So all those are public URL, public APIs you can directly access without any
Yeah.
authentication or keys.
So what I want is I want to get a code whenever I click a button and display it within my variable. So what I can do is I can have a state variable code, which I will update whenever I get a code from my API response. Right now I set it to empty and I'm not seeing any code at the moment. So yeah. So what we'll do is we'll define a on-click method, on click of which we need to get the code. So we'll do get code. Let's define this function. So what we want to do is we want to make an API call. So we see over here, this is the endpoint. If I come over here, I click on try it out, I do execute. I can see what is the request URL I had to it, how will be the response I can see over here in the documentation. So I'll be making use of this endpoint. Yeah. So yeah. How we can make use of fetch is we call the fetch function, we pass in the parameter, which is the URL which we want to hit. Then it is based on like promises, so you don't need to worry about what promises are. We'll be seeing those in the next session, like how promises work and what they are. But this is the how you make use of an API call. So you do fetch, you pass in a URL, then you do dot then. So once this request is completed, you receive some result. So you receive the result. Then what you need to do is you did result.json. So it will convert the data which you have received. So it basically receive it as a bytes array. Bytes are not readable by us, so we convert it to a JSON format. So it will be in a JSON format. Then we can again do dot then. Over here, we'll have the data, whatever our API is giving to us, and we can do whatever we want to do with it. So suppose I do console.log data. I click get code, it made an API call. I can see I received some response and it is stored over here. I see it is an object. Inside object, there is something called content, which has codes, which is an array whose first element is an object which contain a code. So what I need to do is I need to show this code over here. So yeah, since we can see how our object is structured and via the API documentation also we know like how it will be coming. We'll make use of now object destructuring, simple object destructuring to get the code which you want to display. So let's try to fetch codes first from our data object. So we see data is inside, codes are inside contents. So what we can do is we can do contents from contents. We need to get codes array data. So you must be familiar with the syntax. We are just trying to get a specific value from our object. From the data, we want to go inside the contents and get the codes array. And now I can try logging the code. I can see an array of the object. For first item, I need to get a code. So what I can do, I can have a simple check. If codes array is not empty, like if codes dot length greater than 0, then what I need to do is I want to set my code variable to code 0 dot code. We saw that like inside the codes object, we have a code variable. So I'm trying to access the first element and then its code. Else I can just set it to enable to fetch try again. Yeah, we can do no codes. Oh, we have to, yeah, set this thing. We can refactor it to move the condition inside the set code as well. So now I just run this. So if we have some value in the array, we're setting the code to the first element code, else we are setting it to no code form. So I'll run this. I can see I am able to get the data from my API and display it on my tab. So yeah, that's pretty much about fetch, how it can be used. So you can read about fetch documentation as well, how like query parameters can be passed, or if you need to make a post request or any other request, that also you can see. We'll be covering them when we'll be talking in depth about the API after covering promises and all those concepts. But for now, like you can play around with it. We'll be giving a mini project based on this small thing. So you can simply make use of a public API, make a fetch call and display the data in your website.